Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa here for the Better Sex Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, and thank you for your support and your interest and your listening ears. I appreciate it. Hey, and if you're looking for a way to support the show, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, there are a couple things you could do. One would be to go to iTunes and find Better Sex and rate the show and write a review. Apparently, this makes a big difference for other people finding the podcast. So I would appreciate that. I know that's a little bit of work, but you could follow the link, actually, bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes would take you where you need to go. And the other thing you just might consider, if you want, is becoming a Patreon. This is an app that allows you to pledge a small amount per month of money towards the show. So for as little as just $2 a month, which is not even 50 cents an episode, you get advance access to every episode. So I put them up on the weekend 3 to 4 days before they're actually released. So you get these advanced copies, without the intro and outro, but still you get the content. For a little bit more, you get to be part of a quarterly sort of chit-chat, Q&A kind of thing. And for $20 a month, if you like, I'll send you a copy of my new book, Sex Without Stress. Anyway, if you go to bettersexpodcast.com, you will see the link for Patreon. And if you choose to do it, I would appreciate the support. Today's topic, it's funny. I'll tell you a story. I brought Amy Lang on the show with the intention of talking about how to talk to kids about sex, because that's what her book is about, and that's kind of her specialty. And we ended up going down a whole other path because she told me that part of what she does in working with adults around sex with kids is child abuse prevention, sexual abuse prevention. So she goes in and trains staffs at daycares and schools and things like that, and adults for what's normal sexual behavior for children. And it is normal, right? There's exploration and there's experimentation. There's things that, we're sexual beings from the moment we're born. So there's normal behavior, but then there's looking for the red flags. What are the tip-offs that something might have happened to your child or a child in your care or in your circle that would indicate that there may have been some sort of abuse? What are the signs where there's something beyond what's healthy with siblings? Or what if it's your own kid who's exhibiting some of this in terms of not being the victim, but being sort of the victimizer? So it's a pretty heavy topic, but it just struck me as so important. And we ended up spending the entire time talking about this. What's normal sexual behavior? Where are the red flags? And then what do we do about it if we think something's gone on? Or deep breath here if your child tells you that. So I'm just going to have Amy back again for another interview, but this one just felt really, really important. So I hope you get something out of it. And I hope you don't ever need it too. All right. Amy, thanks so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. I love talking about kids and sexuality.
Another person who likes to talk about sex all day. That's
Yay.
That's cool. So tell me first, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself and your business and maybe talk about what drew you into this.
Well, I started my business in 2005, and I had been a sexual health educator for over 16 years. I did lots of pregnancy and abortion and birth control counseling. I worked for Planned Parenthood, but most of the time I was doing this as a volunteer. It was my hobby of all weird things. And I loved it. And I have a master's degree in applied behavioral science, and my focus was in adult education. And when I graduated, I also was pregnant on purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. because pregnancy can happen the other way a lot.
It can, yes.
Yeah, planned the pregnancy. And then I thought that I was just going to be this amazing sex talker, that I would have no trouble talking to my kid. And it turned out that was not true, that I was super uncomfortable. And I felt really weird about talking to my son. And he was like hanging on to his penis one day. He was like 4 and he was getting ready for a bath. And he's like, "Hey, mama, did you know?" And I was like, "Oh God, I know nothing. Don't tell me it feels good to touch your penis. I don't know what to say to you." And so I'm having this little panic. And then I said, "What?" And he said, "I can see the veins in there where the blood goes." And I was like, "Excellent. Get in the bathtub." And that was my moment when I realized that I was not going to be a rock star. And so when I started researching, talking to kids about sex, I couldn't find anything that felt fun and friendly and easy. I mean, there are these big fat books about it, which is great if you're like into reading people's dissertations. But I didn't find the kind of curriculum that I wanted. And so I just had this total brainwave. And I was like, "Hey, you love working with adults and you love talking about sex. So let's just do this thing." So I started Birds and Bees and Kids. That's my company. And for the last 13 years, I've been helping parents all around the world figure out how to have easy, open, and comfortable conversations with their kids.
So are you also teaching kids, or you're just working with the parents and adults about how to work with?
No, I have one mortified teenage boy under my direct control. Yeah. And Milo is 18 now. So, he's about to launch, and he's gone from being horrified by me to finding me moderately entertaining. So
I have a 17-and-a-half-year-old son, my youngest. And I don't know if this happened to you, but he learned not to open the Amazon boxes. Because he used to be so excited to open every box, and then was starting to be sex books, and it's like, never mind, I'm not opening these anymore.
Yeah, I don't have too much fun stuff like that going on. And so, but he just, like, all of his friends' parents know what I do. And we'll be at the grocery store and somebody will say, "Amy Lang, thank you so much, blah, 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 blah." And Milo's like, zoom off in the other direction because he did not want to get involved. But he's better now.
Yeah. So I'm going to go a little out of order from what I was thinking about asking you. Okay, so you're working with parents and adults and teachers, and I mean, like all kinds of adults that are going to be talking to kids about sex.
So part of my work is I do sexual abuse prevention training, and the lens I use is through sexual behavior in children and understanding what's typical, what's not, and using that as a stepping off point for assessing kids' behaviors. And then I also teach a class called Kids Safe Workplace, and that's all about how to catch a predator. Or how to become completely paranoid about your coworkers. So I mean, I think that for folks who work with children, who work directly with children, they need to know this, and most of them don't. So most therapists, most pediatricians, pretty much everybody doesn't understand in a really fundamental way what's typical and common in terms of kids' sexual behaviors, and then when to really worry. So what's happening is that a 5-year-old will have a little round of penis meetings and share his junk with his pal, and the untrained adults will assume that that's somehow sexually abusive, and then these things get blown out of proportion. Whereas if the staff everybody's aware that that's a typical thing for 5-year-olds to do, they can deal with the situation, make sure the kids are safe, talk to the parents, and everybody does better.
All right. So could you walk us through a little bit about, what are some of these totally normal sexual development behaviors, and then where might we be concerned?
Yeah, I love that. Most people don't want to talk about this. I'm super excited to talk to you. Yay! So the first thing we have to just understand is that we're just sexual, right? And I know you get that. We're sexual human beings. And as much as I would love to say, we can just flip a switch and then, yay, suddenly everyone wants to do it. Everyone wants to do it. And we're all, healthy and can handle it and know all the things. We don't get that. That's not the way things are. And so I think the thing that's missing around sexuality in childhood is that just like all the other parts of being human develop over time, so does our sexuality. And so what we see like in young children, and this will all sound really familiar to parents and to humans. We see, playing doctor, where kids inspect each other's privates, or penis meetings, like I just talked about, or vulva conventions, or, they're curious, and most of their sexual behaviors stem from curiosity. They're curiosity based. And then as kids get older, they have questions about, pregnancy and birth and relationships and sex, and they experiment with other kids. And I think what is happening sometimes is that a pair of kids will experiment with a little bit more adult-like sexual behaviors, and then they think that somehow they were abused or that this was so wrong and horrible, when in fact it's a typical part of sexual development to play games like boyfriend, girlfriend, getting married, where there might be some kissing and body rubbing. So that's like the 6 to 12-year-old range. And then when in 9 to 12-year-olds who are in puberty, everything just looks a little more serious. So the experimentation might increase. It starts to look a little more adult-like or teenagery. They start seeking out sexual materials. So this is often when people are starting to look at porn.
Right.
And but the thing you have to kind of hang your hat on is this idea of experimentation. And then when they get to be 13 to 16, the easiest way to think about that is all bets are off. Like they're pretty much doing everything. And about a third of kids in that age group have had penis and vagina sex. It's looking like more kids in that age group are having oral sex. And so there's a little change up in that. Primarily, I think we can just point the finger directly at pornography.
Yeah.
So when you understand that sexual play is what it's technically called, is a totally normal and common part of childhood and of life, that's really around experimentation and sorting things out, then it gives people a place to start from, instead of assuming any kind of sexual behavior between two kids is somehow an assault or a sexual abuse or something like that.
Or something bad has happened to your own child that's making them sexual, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like they've got the bug, right? They've been infected, when the reality is that's usually not the case. So the simplest way to assess sexual behavior in children is essentially just to ask yourself, especially under the sort of 13 and unders, is this adult-like? Does it look like adult sexuality in any way? And sometimes with older kids, we overhear conversation. So if they're talking about sex, which they do, and it sounds very grown-up-y, like they're using adult slang, it sounds like they know more than they should for a 10-year-old, then that's a red flag. And usually...
Could you give an example? I mean, let's take 8-year-olds or something. What looks or sounds adulty?
I have 8 million examples.
Oh, good. Okay.
So let's see. So there were 3 9-year-olds, and there were 2 boys and a girl, and they were at an after-school care program. And the staff person looked over, and they saw one boy standing up, the other boy on his knees with his head in front of his crotch, and then there was a girl that was watching. And so she saw that. I mean, the staff person saw that, and she was like, "Oh crap, that looks like they look like they're having, that's like oral sex mode, right?" So I'm just going to pause right there. So you see how that's adult-like, right?
Yeah.
And then how you're in. I can see you, and I see you look concerned, right?
I mean, yes and no. I'm trying to evaluate, first of all, was he just picking up a Lego? I mean, does this person see something?
No. This is what she saw. Trust me when I tell you, this is what she saw.
Okay.
This is what she saw. So I don't know if you noticed your adult concern kind of popped up, like, uh-oh, right? So that's the other key, is if your adult concern goes up and stays up, then it's probably sexualized, which really means adult-like. So the staff person sees that. And then the kids kind of separated naturally. And then the director talked to both kids on their own. And one of the boys she was like, "So what was going on there?" And he said, "Oh, well, I just had my face in his crotch." So that's not an adult-like word, but what they were doing, right, was a really kind of adult-like behavior.
Okay.
So it turned out that boy that was on his knees had been exposed to pornography by his older cousin, like 3 or 4 months before. So they were having a conversation about it, and so one was showing the other. So in this circumstance, the kid was fine. Everything was fine. It was all okay. But that one little incident is clearly adult-like. Your adult concern went up, and conversations needed to be had.
Right.
And
right.
so
because at that point, the influence is pornography. It's not that the kid had been abused or,
Right. Because most 9-year-olds don't know about oral sex last I checked. Right.
Yes.
So it's that kind of incident. It's easier to see in younger kids because they they're much more open about it. And so, you might see, I'm just trying to think of what would be an example. So there was, like with a preschooler, there was a 4-year-old girl, and every day at recess time or outdoor time, there was a platform, and she'd lie on the platform. She'd lie down on her back. She'd spread her legs and invite boys to lie down on top of her.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you know anything about 4-year-olds, that's not typical, right? So this girl, she was rubbing her vulva against other people, primarily against adult men, on men. She had a single mom, which that's not a thing, but the mom had boyfriends in and out of the house.
Yeah.
And she also dressed in a way that was sort of teenagery. And so there's this whole bunch of red flags. And unfortunately, the school had me in for a training, and this in January, and this had been going on since September.
Wow.
So they didn't know to get her help, and everything. I mean, like, one of those things was reportable to Child Protective Services. So I was kind with them. In my head, I was thinking, what the F is wrong with you people?
Wow.
So,
but it just sort of illustrates how, I want to say clueless, but I'm not sure that's quite the right word. We don't have the context or the perspective all the time for what is normal, what isn't. I mean, and then if you add all our own baggage or experiences that we've had, like, we're not all coming in with this sort of clean-headed, educated perspective. It's like, if I grew up like that, it's
totally normal, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing too is that nobody wants this to be happening to a child, right?
Right.
And so there's also this denial that goes on.
Yeah.
And oftentimes what happens in these circumstances is that the adults will protect the adults. So it's usually a family member or close person who's close to the family, and they don't want to believe it. So they'll dismiss the child. If the child actually says, Uncle Creepy touched my hoo-ha, they'll be like, oh, Uncle Creepy loves you. He wouldn't do that.
Right.
And we know that children false report only 4% of the time.
Wow.
Yeah. So they tell the truth.
Yeah.
That's 96% of the time they're telling the truth.
Yeah.
And so, like, in this circumstance, this private school, they did not want to rock the boat. So nobody was willing to, like, step up until I was there. And and I did not shame them, but I was really close because I was appalled at how long they let it go on. It was so clear to me that there was something going on with this girl. Wow. And they got her. I think they got her help. I mean, they couldn't not.
Yeah.
So, like what you just said, like frankly, people are clueless. They really are clueless. They just don't understand this. And so I just feel so lucky that I get to educate people en masse, right? So I just did a training for 50 Montessori school teachers and staff. And now we know that, like, there are like a gazillion more kids that are safer, and they're protected too.
Yeah.
And they're protected too.
Yeah.
So, so this is one of my passions, as you can hear.
Right.
Yeah. And I just think it's super important.
What about masturbation? What's normal age? I mean, I'm asking you this sort of, on behalf of people that might be listening. Is there ever too early or something that's going to look too adulty, or, any cause for concern?
No. So everybody masturbates, and some little girls find their clitoris when they're 6 months old. Baby boys hang on to their tallywhacker in utero. So we're wired up for things to feel good.
Right.
And so it's very normal and very common for kids to start masturbating. And I'm just going to do a little language switch up. I don't say masturbation for kids who are like second grade, third grade and younger.
Okay.
Because I say self-pleasure or self-stimulation, because masturbation just sounds so grown-up-y to me. Yeah. And it has a connotation of, like, thinking about the other. It sounds like really getting busy, right?
Right.
So I prefer to say self-pleasure, and because of this. So young kids, when they figure out it feels good to touch the privates, woohoo, they touch the privates. Right? Feels good. Why not? I'm bored in the safe way, hand goes down the pants.
Right.
Before nap time, before bedtime, very, very common. So the time to worry about kids and self-stimulation or masturbation is when they do it repeatedly, like they're doing it a lot. Like, instead of playing, like, they'll start playing and then they'll go off and touch themselves, or it's just like not happening at a predictable time. Usually with kids, you can tell, like, you can predict when it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time kids are 6 or so, they know that you touch your privates in private. And so if you have a kid that's older than 6 and is self-stimulating or masturbating in public, that's a red flag.
Okay.
That's a red flag. Like everybody definitely by the end of first grade should know we touch our privates in private.
And we know that because our parents or our teachers or whatever have said that.
Yes. And it's culturally, and that's just the moray of the culture. Like we don't do that.
So somebody who is older than that and is not paying attention to those norms, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
What might that mean?
Sometimes it just means that the child is self-soothing in public and they haven't been told that it's not okay. There's a boy who had just started the 4th grade, and his new teacher noticed that he had his hand down his pants during silent reading time every day.
Yeah.
And so she went to the teacher from the year before and said, "Hey, this guy, hand down his pants." And she said, "Oh yeah, he did that all last year." And so the new teacher knew that that wasn't typical for a 10-year-old. They know you don't touch your mouth in public. And so he was self-soothing. It was unconscious. And the adults around him didn't help him. So he had a couple of sessions with the school counselor, and then he got over it.
Yeah.
And, so that kind of thing. Oftentimes it's like, it's compulsive and it's self-soothing, and it can be an indication that something is going on in their life that's not okay. But oftentimes it's just like that guy. He was just like unconsciously sticking his hand down his pants. And,
it also seems to me that it could be a sign of, anxiety and stress, right?
Yes.
This compulsive need to self-soothe or to remove from interaction with other people or something like that.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So the thing is, you don't want to just jump to the conclusion that the kid's being sexually abused.
Right.
You have to trot down through some things just to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
And kind of we need to get over that compulsion to think oh no, that child's being sexually abused. And that's the compulsion. And most of the time, often it's just typical stuff. And the kid needs a little redirect.
Right.
And the family might need some support around what's typical, what's not, and how to manage that kind of thing in their own family life. But
and of course, then I'm thinking, wow, the care with which that should be brought up with a 10-year-old, or, to not shame kids that are exhibiting some of these behaviors or doing things, we should be doing that in private, to not make somebody feel bad about themselves in that conversation. That's got to take some skill for people.
Yeah, it does. It does take some skill. But the other thing is most of us were shamed in some way about some kind of body, sexy stuff, right? As you well know. So I think the thing to remember about talking to kids about this is to just be really simple and really clear and really kind, and with this 10-year-old, the teacher could have, and maybe she did, just pull them aside and said, "Hey, I've noticed that you're doing this. I just wanted to let you know that it's not okay to do that in public. People feel uncomfortable. And so I'm just going to ask you to stop because kids are mean, right?
Yeah.
And, I don't want kids to tease you. So, let's figure out what we can do to help you stop doing that or change your behavior or whatever." And if you're calm and kind like that, they can hear you. And they'll be more likely to change their behavior, and they won't feel ashamed, especially if you're kind. And kind of, one of my things about working with kids is people make mistakes. Kids make mistakes.
Yeah.
And so if we say, "Oh, you made a mistake, you didn't know," it's way kinder than saying, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and same with kids who are engaging in playing doctor behaviors. And, when we come across that, rather than saying, "What the hell are you doing?" which is what happened to me, is to say, "Hey, I see you guys are looking at each other's privates, and, it's not okay or safe to play this way. People can get hurt when they play games with privates. Let's go find something else to do." And then bust up the scene. And then the kids need to be talked to individually, just very gently, have you played this way before? And you need to be ready for the kid to say, "Yeah, I played it with cousin Jimmy all the time," right? You need to be ready for that, which is a terrible, terrible moment.
Yeah.
But if going into the conversation that might be the response, then you're going to be better able to manage what happens and manage yourself too.
Right.
And, one of the things about having a child tell you that they've been assaulted or, sexually abused in some way is that our job as the person they disclose to is to keep our shit together.
Yeah.
And be calm and talk about "Okay, thank you for telling me. You know what? We'll get you some help. We'll get cousin Creepy some help. And, they made a mistake and we want, I want you to be safe. And, I'm right here for you." And it's a tall, tall, tall order.
Yeah.
To be able to be calm in that circumstance.
Hey, I've just taken a quick break in the show, and I want to draw your attention to my new book. It's called Sex Without Stress, a couple's guide to overcoming disappointment, avoidance, and pressure. This is a total how-to book. Describes the problems that get people stuck avoiding sex because it's become difficult and stressful and fraught even. But it also guides you through a process you take with your partner to have the conversations that you need to have, and then an actual exercise, a whole process around touch and experience that helps you transform your sex life. So if you are stuck in your relationship in a place where you're avoiding sex, or if you know anyone like that, please seek out the book. You can find it on Amazon, both in paperback and on Kindle, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, I'm ending up with more questions the more we talk. So what are some more of the red flags that we might want to pay attention to that kids might exhibit if they're being abused or something has happened?
So if the behavior's adult-like and your adult concern is high, that's a red flag. If it's repeated. So if you say to the kid, hey, not okay, like this 10-year-old, like
right.
If his behavior, I just talk about correction. So if his behavior is kindly corrected and then 3 days later, he's back at it and he's corrected again. And then next week he's doing it again. And then the week after that, he's doing it again. Something's up.
Okay.
Something's up. He can't stop. And it, like I said, it might be anxiety, but it could be something else.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other thing is that usually kids, when they experiment or play kind of sexual games, it's usually with the kid that's the same age as them, same size, same developmental level, and they're usually good friends.
Okay.
So it's not like a one-off with some, like first time, second time kids are playing together and suddenly they got their privates out and they're checking each other out. That's concerning.
Okay.
Because what you need to remember, which might sound weird, but if you put your kid hat on, and you may have experienced this yourself. It's a game they're playing. They're playing a game. They usually talk about it like they're playing a game.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of what you want to look for. So if it's serious, it's repeated, if it's not mutual, like everyone needs to agree. If there's threat, violence, coercion, that's a problem.
Age difference, like you're saying, or,
or
like power differential or something.
Yes. So like a 3-year age difference, it's like the rule of thumb.
Yeah.
So like those are the things to keep an eye out for. But the reality is, if you know what's normal, it's easier to assess, right? I mean, that's one of the things I hate about typical sexual abuse prevention is they teach all the signs and symptoms of trauma, and grandpa died, uncle creepy touched my hoo-ha.
Yeah.
Trauma, right? So that's why I think it's way better to know what's normal or typical so that you have a stepping off place.
What's normal between siblings? Like, it's one thing for me to imagine, like with your friend and you're playing this game. What are the red flags, if you've got siblings?
So with siblings, that relationship tends to be more kind of repulsive. And so by the time kids get, over the age 7 or 8 or so, there's taking baths together and being silly and looking at each other's privates when they're younger. And then as they get older, they might do more like, I'm showing you my butt, I'm showing you my penis, I'm showing you my vagina, because everybody says has that wrong. Vulva people, it's vulva. Right. Please, it's vulva. Come on. Get on the train. I mean, I'm like, yay, vagina, can't see a vagina. Anyway, so it becomes like silly and playful, and that's usually the vibe. Sometimes siblings might play a game where there's some kissing, and anything between siblings that's kind of beyond the sort of preschooler goofy potty talk, that would be concerning because of that natural repulsion thing.
Yeah.
And so, when we get into like people who have been incested, it may have started off as an experimentation game and then just became problematic because nobody was talking to them. But usually there's some coercion and bribing and some other shit that's going on. So it's a little bit harder, but sometimes that kind of sexual experimentation does happen between siblings.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean, unless it was traumatic to you in the moment, then it's not abusive.
Right.
But when you reflect back and you think, oh, I played a kissing game with my brother, and you're like, oh my God, that means we did incest. If it's ongoing, then yes. But if it was just like a one-time thing and then you stop, that's different.
Yeah. And it had the feel of a game and not coercive or not. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And I suppose age difference has something to do in this one.
Oh,
too.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And I know that this kind of thing happens and it can be super traumatic. But the thing to remember too is that the people, when it comes to kids, the people that do the most of the traumatizing, it's us. It's the adults.
Right.
Like we see this going on, we freak out, and the kid might not even know, like, there's nothing, why are you being so crazy? I'm a bad person. When they were just natural curiosity. Like, I've got a vulva, you've got a penis. What the heck is that thing hanging off the front of you? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the other reason why we really need to mind our reaction.
Yeah. So with the reaction, if your kid does tell you that something's happened, and maybe this isn't your expertise, but should we limit how much we ask and talk to them and save some of this for the, CPS or the cops or something? Like, what's, besides holding your shit together as the parent, what's sort of the protocol or the advice?
So the advice there is, if your child or any child discloses to you that they've been abused, or it's like, oh no, that 15-year-old babysitter was playing, a privates game. So they tell you that, then your job is to, like, your instinct is going to be like, oh my God. And you're going to get big and scared because of course you're terrified. Right. So if you just have to calm down. And one of the tricks you can use, if you're like, what the hell? And you can just, the minute you catch yourself, you can say, oh, I'm so sorry. I was really surprised to hear you say that. And then that'll buy you a little time.
Okay.
And then you're like, who, what, when, where? So who did you play this game with? What happened? And you're not CSI, right? You're just really gentle. Who did you play this game with? What happened? When did it happen? Where were you? And then okay, thank you so much for telling me. And I really appreciate your trust in me. So what's going to happen next is we're going to get you some help and get that person some help, because it's not okay or safe to play games with privates.
Okay.
And not okay and not safe is what everybody should be saying instead of inappropriate.
Okay.
Because kids, I don't think they even know what it means.
Right.
It's too long. And then you're done, right? Then you're done. And then you need to call CPS, and you may need to call the police, depending on, I can never remember if it's, I can't remember. I think you call the police if it's a stranger. I can't remember.
Yeah. But call somebody.
Call Child Protective Services or DHS or whatever, whoever runs that show and where in the state that you live in. And then you have to step back and wait, and they'll take care of the CSI type interviewing. And my son's childcare provider was accused of sexually abusing a girl in their care. So I've been through the process. Every kid was interviewed, including Milo, and they were so great. They were gentle. We could listen to the whole conversation. They were really gentle. It was really easy. It wasn't scary to him at all. And we just said, you're going to go talk to some people about, being at Beartime Carlos's, and just like kept it really cash from our end.
Yeah.
And so, in that story, though, it was inconclusive, but he passed a polygraph test, and her story got wilder and wilder and wilder. And so I don't know if he did it. My guess is he didn't, but we also know those guys like Larry Nassar are really charming and really under the rug and can get away with all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. And certainly as a parent, if you have any doubt, it's like, I'm not getting near that with a 10-foot pole, right? Like you just can't take the risk, you know?
Yeah. And the state closed down their childcare. That's what happens when there's an accusation. They're done. You have to go through this whole process. So it was really, really sad. They were really great.
Yeah.
And they ended up losing their house and moving out of state. So that was bad. But also, if he was up to no good, then he didn't have as much access to kids anymore.
And again, maybe this is slightly off topic, but I had an experience like this in my own life. And the actual sexual contact was not a big deal to the kids. It was much more traumatizing with the sort of questioning or the legal proceeding or all the adult hullabaloo around this. It's really, kids do not necessarily see this as a problem. I mean, even if they know they're not going to do this again, like it's not like they're going to go do this all the time or something, but they didn't find the play traumatic.
Right. Yeah, they oftentimes don't. And then the other piece, if the child's being sexually abused, is that they usually love the person.
Yeah.
They like the person. They're a regular part of their life. And so it's confusing.
Right.
And so it's very confusing. And to them and more to the parents, because you just want the parents just want, or the adults just want, like, he's evil. You do not have good feelings for him. Like they want to, like, here, we're just going to cut it off, right? And it just doesn't work that way. Right. And another thing that I think everybody should know is that if kids get therapy before puberty starts, they go on to live healthy, happy, normal lives. The abuse stuff may pop up as puberty starts, and so they may need a little back to the therapist time to kind of process what's happening. But generally speaking, they do really, really, really well. And, I think that knowing that, it's, for me, it's like, okay. And usually they're in therapy for 6 months to a year, depending on what went on. And the whole family needs therapy. It's not just the kid. That's one of my pet peeves. There's something wrong with you, child. And of course, with something like this in a family system, it's like devastating.
Right.
And I'll say one more thing and you can ask me more questions. As you can see, I like talking about this stuff, all weird things. So the other thing too is if there's something going on with a child and they need therapy and they need help, and even if it's just typical sexual behavior that's kind of gone sideways, it's really important that the therapist they see is trained in sexual abuse. They see kids, it's an active part of their practice is sexual abuse because they'll know what I'm talking about.
Right.
They'll know. And if you're just seeing a therapist that's a good friend and doesn't have any experience with this, that's a mistake.
Yes.
That's a mistake.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to get a little bit, I want to say darker, but maybe that's not quite the right thing to say. But what about parents who are worried about the behavior of their own children, not being victimized, but being victimizers? So what are the red flags? Where do people need to, what do they need to be alert for to know from that side?
It's all the same things. So if your kid, and this is like the worst, right? The worst. Yeah. So if your kid is trying to play private parts games like doctor with kids, they're usually preying kids that are younger than them.
Yeah.
So they're a 9-year-old and they're playing with 6-year-olds and they like to play doctor and they get caught a couple of times. That's a red flag. Mm-hmm. If they are really like pursuing sexual material, like trying to look at body, Googling pornies, like they end up looking at porn, that can be a problem. If they use adult-like language, like you overhear them talking to another kid or that kid's parent says, hey, your kid was talking about blowjobs with my kid, that's a red flag, If they're 12, not so much, but if they're 10, maybe, more. And if, one of the things that happens with this, just the typical sexual play is that the kids will do the thing, the parents will find out. And when you ask the kids whose idea it was, they'll say the other guy.
Right.
Or the other gal. Right.
Yeah.
And what that tells you is it was mutual.
Okay.
Right. When you're 5, it's like, that wasn't my idea. It was his idea. And the other one's like, that wasn't my idea. It was his idea. That's probably mutual. Right.
Okay.
And so what happens is if that wasn't mutual or the one kid says, oh yeah, it was totally his idea. Like it was not my idea. I didn't want to play that way at all. And that child's a little bit intense about it. Then it may be that kiddo was the one that was instigating.
Right.
And, I think the biggest mistakes adults make is that when there is a child who is sexually abusive towards another child, they decide that child is a villain. They vilify him or her, and they turn that kid into like a 55-year-old sexual predator.
Right.
When they're not. They're 10, they're 8, they're 5, they're 13. They need help too.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard when your child is victimized to say, and that other child needs help. That requires a I'm just going to call it a maturity and ship togetherness to be able to do that, to say that child really, really needs help, right? My kid needs help too, but that child really needs help.
Yeah.
And that family needs help, because nobody grows up a kid to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really, really hard to be on that end, but same deal. Therapist that deals with sexual abuse, family support, understanding about sexual behavior in children and trusting that when they get help, they're going to do better.
Yeah.
And, some people are sociopaths, right? But you can't really diagnose that for a while, right? You can't decide you're a 6-year-old sociopath, right? I mean, maybe you can, but probably not.
Right.
Right. So it's like, take it down a notch. Remember that child needs help. And if it is your child that's the instigator, then make sure you have help and support, because sometimes it's just that they instigated the kissing game and the other kid didn't want to do that. And so they go home, and some parents parent in such a way that their kids have learned that in order to get a lot of attention, you say, so-and-so's done this terrible thing.
Yeah.
And then you get all big and worried and pay a ton of attention to them. And then the big shindig happens and everybody's crazy. And then it turns out, after investigations happen, that, it was just one time and it was not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But parents go crazy. And again, I totally understand that. I mean, I was just like terrified when that happened at our daycare. And then when my own kiddo was, having penis meetings and, in the front yard, it's great.
Don't listen to this, Milo.
Yeah. Well, I have permission.
Okay.
I have permission. Yeah. I don't tell any stories that I don't have permission to tell. And, when that was going on with him and he's, same age, best friends, whatever, I was really worried.
Yeah.
Even though I knew, right? And it was still hard for me to talk to him about it. And, he said it was his idea. And the other kid said it was his idea, and, now I'm much more, confident and more educated. So I'm like, And I knew at the time it was just, playing dog and sniffing each other's butts.
Right.
So
I guess the basic message is to stay calm, don't overreact, but also keep your eyes open. Don't deny, right? What are the resources parents could access that could help them? They're not going to remember this podcast.
I know.
Where do they go if something's happened and they're trying to figure out, is this normal or not normal? How do we evaluate what we're seeing? So
there's a great organization called Stop It Now, and it's stopitnow.org, and they have wonderful handouts that spell out like, when is this safe, what's not, what to do if kids are engaging in sexual play. There's another woman, Toni Kavanaugh Johnson. She's a real expert in sexual behavior in children. And I do have, I think all of these resources are on my website. It's great.com. And then the other thing that's a huge thing to prevent kids from being taken advantage of is to talk to them about sex. Right. Kids who know about sex and sexuality, of open communication with their parents, who know they have a vulva, right? Yeah. Who know the correct names for everybody's private body parts, they're safer. And we see this over and over and over again in studies of people who were sexually abused. 90% of the time they say, I didn't really know anything about sex.
Okay, so this is where a book like yours really comes in, right? And I am talking out of my ass there a little bit, but it's like a big chunk of folks say, I just didn't have any education about this. I didn't know. I didn't know this wasn't okay. And just directly saying to kids, it's not okay or safe to play games with your privates. If someone older than you or bigger than you wants you to touch their privates or touches your privates, you need to let me know, because that's not safe. Yeah. Well, the other thing, talking about sex with our kids does is lets them know it's okay to talk about sex. It's not even just about their education, but that this is a topic you can bring up if you've got concerns or questions or something happens. Right. Exactly. So exactly. Crucial. All right. So would you say just a word about your book specifically? And, you do more than this sexual abuse prevention, right? And that's what we ended up talking about all day. Right. So let me give you another chance to talk a little bit about your offerings and your book. Yeah. So like I said, I started off teaching parents how to talk with kids about the birds and the bees. And my specific age focus is birth to 12-ish, because I believe, and all the evidence is showing us, that sooner is better. Sooner is better. Yeah. And so my book, Birds and Bees and Your Kids, is all about helping parents figure out their values about sexuality, because if you don't know your values, then it doesn't give you the roots you need to talk to your kids about the easier stuff, like penis goes in the vagina. That's the usual way babies are made. And then it also
doesn't set you up to handle the hard stuff, right? Like, I don't think anybody really wants to talk to their kid about oral sex, but you need to.
Yeah.
Right? You need to. So you don't start with oral sex, right? You start with the correct names for private body parts.
Right.
And then that's just the great space to move on from. But with my book, it takes you through different scenarios and helps you kind of sort out what you believe about things. Because my belief is that when you know your values, that other stuff is easy.
Yeah.
Your values are key.
Yeah.
And occasionally someone will say to me, well, I don't want to force my values down my kid's throat. I want my kid to develop their own values. And of course they'll develop their own values, but they need a stepping off place.
Right. Right.
And I think we all think our values are right.
Well, I think we do. And I think even if you are trying not to communicate your values, you're doing it one way or another. They're still going to inform. I mean, it's not, we can't live in a valueless home. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's actually not a thing.
Yeah.
That's not a thing. So that's what the intention of my book. So it does talk a little bit about talking to kids about sex specifically and give some ideas and some age ranges and a bunch of resources.
Great.
So that's my book if you like book learning. And then I have an online resource center that is full of all the things you need. So there's a 3-part course that helps you deeply dive into the best ways to talk to your kids about sex. There are webinars. I have a webinar with my colleague Jill Langford that's all about talking to kids about porn, which we have to do now. You cannot avoid talking to your children about porn.
Yeah.
And there's, what by when and tips for talking to boys, tips for talking to girls. And, my website is pretty robust. There's video and there's book suggestions and I have a blog and I just started a podcast.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's called Just Say This. And it's for parents to call in, leave me a question. I answer the question on air. It's all recorded. So you don't have to schedule a time with me. And so that's been really fun for me to reach out to parents in this different way. And there's no rhyme or reason to the questions I answer. So one of them is talking about dildos and baby boners. Right. Because, I don't really care and parents need to know it all. So.
Right. Okay. I will put all those links in the show notes too. So it's easy for people to find everything. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah. I can't believe we ended up talking about sexual abuse prevention, but hey, maybe we've helped some parents.
I hope so.
Better, right? To feel better about their own personal experience and then to help their kids.
Yeah.
Their kids.
Great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get to know you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.